I have a penchant for fairness, and I'm increasingly amazed at the extraordinary numbers of already marginalized youth who continue to become disenfranchised as a result of their very low levels of academic competence. Youth are the promise of the future, and an early start to correct phenomena of low literacy levels among young children, coupled with intense academic support, while critical, will also need a multicultural curriculum or culturally relevant curriculum to balance things and optimize success. Bobbitt said, education must take a pace not set by itself, but by social progress. He discussed how global development, which for the purposes of my discussion would include accomplishments that ultimately raised the social strata of minorities, deeming them finally integrated, would urge similar advances in education. As society changes, curriculum designers also should shift their thinking to be mindful of the need to raise awareness of Canada's diverse population when charting educational paths, with the objective of filling gaps in knowledge, as Bobbitt suggested, or instituting behavioral change, as mentioned by Tyler. My final assignment will be in the form of an essay that will discuss multicultural education as it pertains to Blacks and First Nations communities in Canada who have a documented, ongoing, and current history of marginalization. The position I assume in my writing of this essay will emphasize how the predicaments of historically excluded communities can be altered through a shift in curriculum design. In examining how a multicultural curriculum can improve education and subsequently general human relations, I will concentrate mainly on improvements that would be inevitable if curriculum design completely embraced the ethnic features of Black and Aboriginal Canadian learners in what could be described as ethnic-specific schools, explaining how such schools would not reflect reverse racism or separation, but serve to uplift historically downtrodden communities. So why multicultural curriculum? Low academic competence is a direct threat to advancing an already downtrodden community. And without even making reference to the scientific indicators stemming from research, the blatant reality is unavoidable. And it shows underachievement is rife within Black and Aboriginal learners, whose knowledge gaps gets filled primarily with culturally hegemonic understandings. The impact of hegemony on education for marginalized groups has been documented as being astounding. In her report on a study of Black mobility in Montreal, Dorothy Williams unveiled a deep-rooted history that had never been recorded in any account of Quebec history. Williams discloses that the first Quebec historian, Francois Garonou, actually recorded a glaring piece of fabrication in saying that slavery did not exist in Quebec. And this myth has been perpetuated throughout the years, reinforcing the stereotype that Blacks do not belong here and have perhaps a history in Canada and Quebec that spans a few decades at the most. In a similar way, the Aboriginal people of Canada suffered grave injustice at the hands of colonizers whose attempts to assimilate, hence eradicate their culture, resulted in an undermining of a vibrant society whose knowledge gaps were subsequently filled through hegemonic curriculum design. Using the culture and traditions of the dominant and oppressive society as a barometer for cultural and educational excellence was the recipe for disaster that was widely and automatically embraced throughout Canada, resulting in a 21st century dilemma that sees Aboriginal learners tending to struggle to realize academic, hence overall success. A direct source of socio-economic disadvantage, hegemony drives discrimination, job market segmentation, general exclusion, and ultimately affects the determinants of health and existence. Within educational spheres in Canada, there has been a proliferation of incidences of academic failure amongst ethnic minorities and discourses inundated with terms like dropout, disenfranchised, disadvantaged, and underachiever permeate educational arguments in identifying and discussing particularly those who have long histories of marginalization, like Black Canadians and Aboriginal minorities. This, in my view, is the consequence of virtually obliterating groups of people from their country's history through attempts of assimilation and outright ignoring their presence and history. However, education can play an important role in rectifying this occurrence. Shifting the historical grounding of formative education from its post-colonial white Eurocentric framework is key. The Canadian multi-ethnic reality urges such a change to not only facilitate equitable inclusion, but also to enable validation of the human spirit through cultural identity and the promotion of culturally relevant curriculum design. My stance that cultural identity infused by means of relevant and strategically implemented curricula is vital. It should be a critical point in addressing and reversing failure in particularly Black and Aboriginal Canadian learners. In my view, while teachers and learners live simply within multiple cultured spheres on one hand and seemingly unicultural realities on the other, each individual should embrace, gain knowledge of, and identify with the symbols that mirror themselves, while at the same time having exposure to and inclusiveness of the cultures of diverse ethnicities. Through education and schooling, a sense of identity within culture and community has to be cultivated to realize equal opportunities for all ethnicities, and this calls for revision of much of Canadian and Quebec curricula. Incorporating the culturally relevant curriculum design. While a multicultural curriculum that challenges the notion of a Eurocentric and superior knowledge has been criticized for appealing more to self-esteem and not being focused enough on preparing especially minority learners for hard work and intellectual challenge, I argue that a low sense of self can trigger an academic performance to match. Therefore, who we are historically is important, and an undistorted transmission of effective, transforming, and empowering symbols can serve to bolster an all-important cultural identity and subsequent intellectual achievement. I make reference to a scholar, Bartholomew, who took the stance that a humanizing curriculum that respects and uses the reality, history, and perspective of learners as an integral part of educational practice, that acknowledges and uses existing student language and knowledge, would constitute a humanizing experience, especially for those learners traditionally disempowered or dehumanized in schools. Demands for a multicultural curriculum became common following desegregation and in the 60s civil rights activity in North America. The need to have the curriculum reflect the communities by including culturally relevant sources of knowledge while maintaining a high academic standard was strongly requested and somewhat accommodated. Amongst its many benefits, a multicultural curriculum sets an important platform for the elimination of man's inhumanity towards each other by diffusing myths and fears, uncovering the unknown, hence facilitating togetherness and understanding. On the extreme opposite end of the regular, existing, mildly or even sufficiently multicultural curriculum design that can be integrated into all schools is the idea of the absolute culturally relevant and curriculum model that would present as Canadian Black or Aboriginal schools, not segregated, but schools comprised of culturally relevant or ethnic specific curricula. The benefits of culturally relevant curriculum in ethnic specific schools. Well, embracing a culturally relevant curriculum and engaging in culturally relevant pedagogy requires teachers to abandon the deficit model by viewing students as active and capable, not as dropouts or irrelevant. It is a curriculum that promotes positive change through teachers demonstrating and accepting political clarity that works to counteract society's unequal power relations and influences the socio-cultural knowledge, trends, and constructs of educational institutions. A culturally relevant curriculum and its implementation will foster collective and not simply individual empowerment. Following a presentation I attended that was animated by Leah Newbold, one of the original and current teachers of Toronto's kindergarten to grade 7 Afrocentric alternative school, I became more aware of the deep-rooted problems that culturally relevant pedagogy needs to address. I also became aware of the principles adhered to in determining what culturally relevant curriculum and implementation would look like and how it would foster successful outcomes for learners. Newbold listed these principles as hard work, self-pride, and developing the ability to be critically engaged in society as set criteria for culturally relevant pedagogy. Similarly, another writer, Ladson Billings, described the 3 standards that determine culturally relevant pedagogy to be: students must develop academic success, students must develop and or maintain cultural competence, and students must develop a critical consciousness through which they challenge the status quo of the current social order. Culturally relevant pedagogy is of a particular therapeutic or remedial nature and most relevant. It's most relevant for ethnicities with a history of being subjugated. Dea, another scholar, explored the idea that Black African education in Canada must embrace the importance of the creative self and personhood as a path to individual and collective knowledge. Education must work with the ways of ancestral cultural knowledge retentions, and particularly the role of culture and identity as a form of education. Culturally relevant pedagogy can further debunk European culturally driven chauvinism that continues to rear its ugly head even following the emergence of Boas's theory of cultural relativism that caused a shift in the society's opinion on cultural competence. Most would now agree that all human beings acquire cultural competence in specific cultural milieus and that there are many different kinds of culture. Still, there is a lingering sense of being dominated by what is termed a dominant culture, and it forces aspirations to realize a decentering of Eurocentric experiences or culture from the public education systems in Canada. And that's what I'll be writing about. Any questions?